Hey everyone, tonight we're going to take a journey, not to ancient temples or grand empires, but to a far more intimate and terrifying place, a freezing, drafty stone house, somewhere in medieval Europe. You're there, huddled by a meager fire, the chill seeping into your bones. And you're not just cold, you're pregnant, very pregnant. We're going to delve into the raw, brutal reality of Yash giving birth in a world stripped bare of modern comforts, where every contraction is a leap into the unknown and survival is far from guaranteed. This isn't a story for the faint of heart, and let's be honest, you probably won't survive this without a profound appreciation for central heating and epidurals. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to imagine our little sleepy community stretching across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the subtle shift in your body, a growing heaviness that signals the impending arrival. It's late medieval Europe, perhaps the 14th or 15th century. And for you, a peasant woman or someone of modest means, pregnancy has been a long, often anxious wait. There's no fancy ultrasound to tell you the due date, no regular checkups with a friendly doctor. You've relied on instinct, the wisdom of older women in your village, and perhaps a few whispered prayers. This sheer uncertainty and isolation of late medieval pregnancy is a crucial mainstream historical fact. A woman's body was a mystery, and childbirth a perilous, often solitary, ordeal. As the days turn into weeks, you become intimately aware of every ache, every shift within you. There's a constant, low-grade worry, a nagging fear that never quite leaves you. You've heard the stories, of course. Every woman in your community knows of someone who didn't survive or whose baby didn't cry. These aren't abstract tales, they're the harsh reality of life. You see the faint scars on older women, the quiet sadness in their eyes when they speak of lost infants. Here's a quirky tidbit to combat the uncertainty. Many pregnant women in this era relied on a medley of superstitions and folk remedies. Key, charms worn around the neck, specific herbs consumed, or even particular prayers recited, all aimed at ensuring a safe delivery and a healthy child. Imagine clutching a small, dried herb sachet, convinced it holds the key to your fate, as you feel the baby shift inside you. You might even find yourself instinctively rubbing your belly, just as they did, hoping for the best. The knowledge of childbirth was largely passed down through generations of women, often fragmented and localized. There were no standardized medical texts on obstetrics accessible to the common person, and certainly no widespread medical training for birth attendants beyond practical experience. You are living in an era where the human body, especially the female reproductive system, was poorly understood, often viewed through a lens of humoral theory and religious belief rather than empirical science. Historians still argue whether the lack of scientific understanding in medieval childbirth contributed more to high mortality rates, or if factors like pervasive malnutrition, poor sanitation, and the sheer physical toll of constant childbearing were equally, if not more, significant. Was it ignorance of anatomy, or the harsh realities of daily life that posed the greater threat? Regardless, you, in your very pregnant state, are experiencing the profound physical and emotional weight of this reality, knowing that what's to come is a journey into the great unknown, with precious little to guide you. The chill in the air, a constant companion, serves as a grim reminder of the challenges ahead. The growing unease in your pregnant body is compounded by an even more immediate, biting reality: winter's cruel embrace. You feel it seeping through the cracks in the walls, radiating from the cold stone floor, and clinging to every breath you take. It's not just a chilly day. This is a medieval winter, a brutal, relentless force that impacts every aspect of life, especially for those in humble dwellings. This compounding of the difficulties by a harsh, Unyielding medieval winter is a crucial mainstream historical fact. The season could literally be a matter of life and death. You pull your woolen shawl tight around you, but it offers little defense against the pervasive damp and cold. Outside, the landscape is likely stark, perhaps covered in a thin, grimy layer of snow or churned into frigid mud. The wind whistles through gaps you can't quite block, carrying with it the icy breath of distant mountains or open fields. Every chore, from fetching water to tending the fire, becomes an arduous battle against the elements, draining precious energy you desperately need for what's to come. Here's a quirky tidbit in some regions. People would deliberately keep livestock, like pigs or cows, on the ground floor of their homes, not just for security, but also for their body heat. Imagine sharing your cramped living space with a grunting pig, whose warmth is a welcome, if smelly, addition to your freezing house. You might even find yourself contemplating whether a warm, furry animal is worth the questionable aroma right now. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's a constant threat. Your fingers ache, your toes feel numb, and the very air you breathe chills your lungs. Water freezes in buckets, and food stores are often meager, diminishing with each passing week. The lack of fresh produce leads to a monotonous, nutrient-poor diet, further weakening your already stressed body. You're constantly battling a low-grade fever from recurring colds or coughs, making every movement feel heavier, every breath more labored. The isolation, already a feature of medieval life for many, becomes even more profound in winter. Roads are impassable, rivers frozen, and travel is dangerous. If you had hoped for assistance from a relative in a neighboring village, or perhaps even a more experienced wise woman from further afield, those hopes might be dashed by the sheer impossibility of travel. The world shrinks to the four cold walls of your home and the few, likely inexperienced, people within it. Historians still argue whether the direct physiological stress of cold and malnutrition in medieval winter contributed more to higher maternal and infant mortality rates, or if the indirect effects, such as increased isolation and difficulty accessing even rudimentary help, were equally significant. Was it the chill itself, or the severed connections, that posed the greater risk regardless? You feel the oppressive weight of this particular winter, an invisible enemy, quietly and relentlessly working against you, making the thought of birth in such conditions a truly daunting prospect. Every shiver is a reminder of the monumental challenge ahead. With the biting cold as your unwelcome companion, you now cast your eyes around your meager dwelling, a freezing stone house. This isn't the cozy, timber-framed cottage of storybooks. It's a stark, often drafty structure, and understanding its construction is a crucial mainstream historical fact for comprehending the monumental challenge of enduring a medieval winter, let alone giving birth within its walls. You observe the walls around you, likely constructed of rough-hewn stone or rubble, held together with coarse mortar or even just packed earth. These materials, while robust and readily available, are terrible insulators. They absorb the outdoor chill and radiate it inward, making the interior feel little warmer than the outside, even with a fire flickering weakly in the hearth. There's a constant, penetrating cold that seems to emanate from the very fabric of the building, reaching deep into your bones. It's like living inside a very large, perpetually refrigerated oven. The floor beneath your feet is probably hard-packed earth, or perhaps uneven flagstones, offering no warmth whatsoever. You might have some straw strewn about, or a few rough animal skins, but these offer only minimal protection from the damp, unyielding cold underfoot. Every step sends a shiver up your legs, and you find yourself instinctively trying to minimize contact with the floor. Here's a quirky tidbit: windows, if they exist at all, would be small, unglazed openings, perhaps covered with animal bladder, oiled cloth, or wooden shutters. These let in very little light and even less warmth, acting more as glorified draft inducers than sources of illumination. Imagine trying to see anything clearly in the dim, perpetually twilight interior, where daylight struggles to penetrate the thick walls and meager openings. You might even find yourself squinting, trying to make out familiar objects in the gloom, feeling a profound sense of claustrophobia. The roof, too, contributes to the cold. Often made of thatch or rough timber planks, perhaps covered with heavy stone slabs. It might offer some protection from rain and snow, but little in the way of insulation. Any heat that manages to rise from the hearth quickly escapes through cracks, gaps, or the smoke hole, making it a constant battle to retain even a whisper of warmth. You can almost feel the heat being sucked upwards, leaving the lower parts of the room stubbornly cold. There's no concept of modern insulation, no double glazing, no sealed doors. The very construction techniques, while effective for basic shelter against the elements, were utterly inadequate for truly warming an interior space. The constant drafts, the pervasive dampness, and the radiating chill from the stone created an environment that was fundamentally hostile to warmth and comfort. Historians still argue whether the apparent simplicity of medieval peasant homes was primarily due to a lack of building technology, or if it was more a reflection of economic necessity and the limited resources available to the vast majority of the population. Was it an inability to build better, or simply that a warmer, more insulated home was an unaffordable luxury? Regardless, you are now acutely aware that this stone house, your only refuge, is conspiring with the winter outside to make your impending birth even more challenging, turning comfort into a distant, almost forgotten dream. As the cold penetrates your very being, you become acutely aware of everything you don't have. There are no modern comforts here, not even the simplest ones you take for granted in your own time. This absolute absence of modern hygiene, pain relief, and medical knowledge is a crucial mainstream historical fact that dramatically escalates the danger of childbirth in this era. You are truly on your own, facing one of life's most intense physical challenges with nothing but grit and raw instinct. Imagine the sterile environment of a modern hospital, the crisp sheets, the gleaming instruments, the reassuring beeps of machines. Now, strip all of that away. You are in a dim, perhaps smoky, room. There's no running water, let alone hot water. For washing, the concept of germ theory is centuries away. People don't understand that invisible enemies can cause infection. The very air, thick with dust, animal dander, and soot from the fire, carries unseen threats. You realize with a chilling certainty that even a simple cut, let alone a tear during birth, could quickly become a death sentence. Here's a quirky tidbit without readily available soap or antiseptics. Medieval birthing practices often involved using whatever cloths were at hand, which were likely unwashed or only rinsed in cold, dubious water. Imagine the frantic search for clean linen, only to find nothing truly clean by modern standards. You might shudder at the thought of the unseen microscopic dangers lurking on every surface, ready to invade a vulnerable body. And then there's the pain. Oh, the pain. Today, you might have access to epidurals, gas and air, or even just a simple paracetamol. Here, there is nothing. No understanding of nerve blocks, no synthetic painkillers. Your only allies are endurance, prayer, and perhaps a swig of rough, potent ale, which might offer a brief fuzziness, but certainly no true relief. You are facing an ordeal of raw, unmitigated agony, a primal scream echoing through the ages. You might even find yourself clenching your jaw, bracing yourself against an imaginary wave of contractions, acutely aware of the vulnerability of your own body. Medical knowledge about the birthing process itself is rudimentary at best. Doctors, typically men, rarely attended births, viewing it as a domain of women. Their knowledge of female anatomy was often based on outdated texts from ancient Greece and Rome, often misinterpreted or incomplete. There's no understanding of fetal positioning, no concept of induced labor, no surgical interventions like cesarean sections as a viable option for a live mother and baby. If something goes wrong, if the baby presents incorrectly, or if labor stalls, there are virtually no effective medical tools to help. Historians still argue whether the primary barrier to effective pain relief in medieval childbirth was purely a lack of scientific knowledge and pharmaceutical compounds, or if societal and religious attitudes, which sometimes viewed childbirth pain as a divine punishment for Eve's sin, also contributed to its perpetuation. Was it simply ignorance or a cultural acceptance of suffering? Regardless, you feel the profound weight of this historical void, understanding that the greatest challenges you face are not just the physical demands of birth, but the terrifying absence of the safety nets that modern medicine provides. Every ache, every throb, is amplified by this stark reality. With the biting cold and the terrifying absence of modern aid pressing in, your thoughts turn to the most immediate, desperate need warmth. You search your freezing stone house for any sign of comfort, understanding that the hearth is your only real hope. This reliance on the want hearth and home fire, as the primary, often insufficient, method of heating is a crucial mainstream historical fact for survival in a medieval dwelling. Imagine kneeling by the hearth, a crude stone or brick structure, perhaps just an open pit against a wall, where a small fire flickers weakly. It's not a roaring blaze designed for comfort, but a carefully managed flame, fueled by precious, laboriously gathered wood or peat. Every ember is valuable, every stick of fuel a resource to be conserved. The smoke, instead of being efficiently channeled up a chimney, a luxury in many homes of this era, might simply drift upwards to a hole in the roof, or worse, fill the room, stinging your eyes and coating everything in soot. You cough, trying to clear your lungs, wishing for a breath of clean air. Here's a quirky tidbit to maximize the meager heat. Families would often sleep very close to the hearth, sometimes even sharing blankets with their animals. Remember that pig from earlier. They might also wear multiple layers of woolen clothing and use thick, heavy blankets stuffed with straw or wool. Imagine trying to get comfortable, your pregnant belly a monumental presence, while constantly shifting to avoid the smoke and find the warmest spot on the dirt floor, perhaps next to a snoring goat. You might even find yourself wishing for a giant, fluffy cat to curl up with, just for the body heat. The heat radiated from the fire is localized and quickly dissipates into the vast, cold stone walls. Only the immediate vicinity of the hearth offers any true relief from the biting cold, leaving the rest of the room perpetually chilly. You might try to set up a makeshift screen, perhaps a hung blanket or a piece of hide, to create a smaller, warmer zone for yourself, but the drafts still find their way in, seeking out any exposed skin. As labor potentially nears, the need for consistent warmth becomes even more critical for both your vulnerable body and the impending newborn. Maintaining the fire becomes an urgent, relentless task. Who will gather more fuel? Who will keep the embers alive through the long, dark hours of night? It's a constant battle against the encroaching cold, a struggle that drains energy and adds to the immense physical burden you already carry. Historians still argue whether the persistent cold and poor air quality from smoke in medieval homes contributed more to chronic respiratory illnesses, or if the frequent exposure to infectious diseases from close quarters was the greater health threat. Was it the chill or the cough that eventually wore people down? Regardless, you feel the pervasive damp and cold emanating from the very stones of your house, realizing that the hearth, your only source of warmth, is a precious, fragile comfort in a relentlessly hostile environment, offering a stark reminder of the basic struggle for survival. With the chill seeping into your very bones and the meager fire offering only fleeting comfort, another profound absence looms large, the midwife's absence. This lack of skilled, professional assistance is a crucial mainstream historical fact that dramatically elevates the danger of childbirth in your medieval setting, leaving you to face this intensely vulnerable moment with potentially untrained or inexperienced support. Imagine you felt the first unmistakable twinges of labor. Your mind immediately leaps to the wise woman in the next village, or perhaps an older, more experienced neighbor. But what if she's too far? What if the winter snows have blocked the path? What if she's already attending another birth? a common occurrence given the high birth rates and concurrent labors in a small community. The grim reality is that a skilled midwife, if one truly exists in your immediate vicinity, might simply be unavailable. You are left, perhaps, with only family members, your mother, your sister, a kind neighbor, whose knowledge might be limited to what they've seen or experienced themselves, and who are likely as fearful and ignorant of complications as you are. Here's a quirky tidbit. While some communities had recognized experienced midwives, their training was entirely informal, passed down through apprenticeship and observation. There were no certificates, no medical schools for them, and certainly no understanding of modern sterile practices. Imagine a midwife arriving, her hands perhaps unwashed, carrying a small leather bag with a few simple herbs and a well-worn piece of cloth, her primary tool being her intuition and perhaps a good luck charm. You might even find yourself looking at her hands, wondering what unseen things they might carry. The concept of a professional midwife, in the sense of someone with formal, specialized training in anatomy and obstetrics, was rare in this era, especially in rural or poorer regions. Birthing was overwhelmingly a female domain, shrouded in privacy and tradition, often excluding male doctors who typically dealt with wealthier, urban patients and rarely attended births directly. This meant that even if a physician was available, their knowledge of childbirth might be theoretical at best, and cultural norms often prevented their involvement. Without a trained midwife, there's no one to recognize warning signs, no one to offer proper guidance on positioning, no one to manage potential complications like a retained placenta or excessive bleeding. The birthing process becomes less about active management and more about passive waiting, hoping that nature takes its course without fatal intervention. The tension in the room, palpable and silent, is compounded by this profound lack of expertise. Historians still argue whether the high maternal mortality rates in medieval Europe were primarily due to the lack of skilled birth attendants, or if other factors, such as maternal exhaustion from repeated pregnancies, malnutrition, and pervasive infection, were more significant contributors to fatal outcomes. Was it the absence of hands-on expertise, or the underlying vulnerabilities of the birthing body, that pose the greater risk regardless? You feel the profound anxiety of this moment, knowing that the most critical aid you could hope for is simply not present, leaving you adrift in a sea of primal uncertainty. The sounds of winter outside seem to mock your increasing vulnerability. The creeping realization of the midwife's absence is now overshadowed by an undeniable internal shift. Your body, despite the biting cold and the pervasive fear, is beginning its relentless work. You feel the first, unmistakable tightenings, growing in intensity and frequency. This terrifying yet momentous initiation of labor is a crucial mainstream historical fact, marking the transition from anxious waiting to the visceral, uncontrollable reality of childbirth, often alone or with minimal, inexperienced support. Imagine a dull ache low in your back, a feeling that quickly progresses to a more defined cramping sensation, like a knot tightening and releasing. It's unlike anything you felt before, a sensation that is both profoundly intimate and utterly alien. You try to breathe through it, as the older women might have advised, but panic flickers at the edges of your resolve. The world around you, already stark and cold, now seems to narrow to the confines of your own straining body. You might be alone in your small, stone dwelling, or perhaps with a frightened family member, an older mother whose own birthing experiences were similarly fraught, or a young sister whose eyes are wide with apprehension. Their presence, while comforting in its intent, offers little in the way of expertise. They might offer encouraging murmurs, or simply hover, helpless witnesses to your ordeal. You feel a profound sense of isolation, even if there are others in the room. Here's a quirky tidbit without the precise timing mechanisms of modern medicine. Women in medieval times relied on subjective experiences to gauge labor progression. A good labor might be described by the intensity of cries or the number of hours passed, rather than specific cervical dilation. Imagine trying to explain to your family that it feels like the blacksmith's hammer hitting my insides, but slowly, and them just nodding, equally lost. You might even find yourself wishing for a tiny hourglass to measure the agonizing minutes between contractions. The initial hours are often a slow, grinding process. You might try to walk around to keep moving as some ancient wisdom suggests, but the cold and your sheer exhaustion make every step a monumental effort. You lean against a rough stone wall, its chill seeping into your back, trying to find a position that eases the discomfort. If only for a moment, the pain builds, cresting like a wave, then receding, leaving you breathless and drained, only to begin its relentless ascent once more. The sounds of the house are magnified by your heightened senses, the crackle of the meager fire, the howl of the wind outside, the anxious breathing of anyone nearby. Each sound seems to underscore your vulnerability, drawing you further into your own body. There's no distraction, no television, no soothing music, just the raw, primal reality of birth. Historians still argue whether the perceived naturalness of medieval childbirth, without medical intervention, was genuinely empowering for women, or if it merely masked immense suffering and a high incidence of preventable deaths. Was it a celebration of female resilience, or simply a brutal necessity? Regardless, you are now fully immersed in the terrifying and awe-inspiring process of labor, where your body takes over, driven by ancient instincts, in a world utterly unprepared to truly assist it. The cold stone floor feels harder, the air colder, as the undeniable truth of what is happening fully sets in. As the relentless waves of labor grow in intensity, your exhausted body instinctively seeks ways to cope, to find some measure of relief or efficiency. Your attention turns to a positioning for delivery, key, a crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights the varied and often active postures medieval women adopted during childbirth. In stark contrast to the supine position, common in modern Western obstetrics, this wasn't about comfort, but about leveraging gravity and natural mechanics without professional guidance. Imagine yourself on the hard, cold floor, or perhaps supported by a stool or the edge of a sturdy piece of furniture. You might instinctively want to squat, kneel, or even stand and lean, using gravity to aid the descent of the baby. The women around you, if any are present, might try to support you, holding you upright or bracing you as you push. There's no birthing bed, no stirrups, just your own body and the raw earth beneath you. Here's a quirky tidbit: while lying on one's back supine became common later, perhaps due to convenience for male physicians. Active, upright birthing positions were far more prevalent throughout most of history. This included squatting, kneeling, standing, or sitting on a birthing stool. Imagine the sheer strength required to maintain a squatting position through hours of labor, your muscles screaming in protest, but your instinct telling you it's the most effective way. You might even find yourself grunting, a primal sound escaping your lips as you bear down. The goal of these active positions was to utilize gravity, which can help the baby descend through the birth canal more efficiently. They also allow for a wider pelvic outlet compared to lying flat on your back, which can actually restrict the pelvis. Without a trained professional to guide you or intervene, relying on these natural positions was a matter of instinct and inherited traditional knowledge. Your body is doing what it has evolved to do, even if your mind is screaming in fear. The women assisting you, if present, would likely encourage these upright positions, perhaps offering their shoulders or arms for you to lean on. They might try to rub your back or apply warm compresses, but their primary role would be supportive, helping you maintain a beneficial posture rather than actively managing the delivery. You feel their hands on you, a frail connection to the outside world as your body is consumed by its monumental task. The lack of control, the feeling of your body being taken over by an overwhelming force, is terrifying. You push, you strain, you bear down with every ounce of strength you have, guided only by instinct and the urgent need to bring this immense pressure to an end. The cold of the stone house is a distant sensation, replaced by the internal furnace of your laboring body. Historians still argue whether the shift to supine birthing positions, common from the 17th century onwards, was primarily driven by the convenience of male physicians, or if it genuinely offered some advantages in monitoring and intervention. Despite its physiological drawbacks for the laboring woman, was it a medical advancement or a societal imposition? Regardless, you are experiencing childbirth in a way that is utterly primal, unmediated by modern medical convenience, relying entirely on your body's innate wisdom in the face of immense pain and danger. Every push is an act of desperate hope. As the pain intensifies, your mind, desperate for any reprieve, might grasp at the limited knowledge and beliefs available in your medieval world. You are now exposed to herbal remedies and superstitions, a crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights the blend of folk medicine, religious belief, and often irrational practices used to alleviate pain or address complications during childbirth. Without true medical science, hope clung to the familiar and the arcane. Imagine a relative or assisting woman pressing a poultice of specific herbs onto your skin, perhaps mugwort or pennyroyal, believed to ease contractions or speed delivery. You might be given a concoction to drink, a bitter brew made from various plants, their efficacy more a matter of faith than chemistry. You swallow it, desperate for any effect. Even a placebo. The taste is foul, but the hope it carries, however faint, is intoxicating. Here's a quirky tidbit beyond herbs. Various bizarre or superstitious practices were sometimes employed. This could include placing specific objects under the laboring woman's bed, reciting charms, or even opening every lock in the house, believing it would unlock the birth. Imagine someone frantically fumbling with an old, rusty padlock on a chest, convinced that this action, not your body's immense work, holds the key to your survival. You might even want to laugh if the pain weren't so overwhelming. These practices were born out of a deep-seated fear and a profound lack of understanding of physiological processes. When faced with an overwhelming and dangerous event like childbirth, people clung to whatever offered a semblance of control or intervention. It was a mixture of inherited wisdom, trial and error, and a strong belief in the power of sympathetic magic and divine intervention. The efficacy of these remedies was, of course, highly questionable. Some herbs might have had mild sedative properties or acted as uterine stimulants, but many were inert or even harmful. The superstitions, while providing psychological comfort, offered no real help against hemorrhage or fetal malposition. You feel the crushing weight of this medical void, knowing that your chances of survival depend entirely on the natural course of events, with no reliable backup plan. The women attending you, if any, would be earnest in their efforts, drawing on generations of inherited, often unverified, wisdom. Their intentions are good, their desperation as palpable as your own. They would try everything they knew, pouring all their hope into these flimsy interventions. You grasp their hands, seeing their fear mirroring your own, as another wave of pain washes over you. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these herbal remedies and superstitious practices during medieval childbirth primarily served a psychological function, providing comfort and a sense of agency in a helpless situation, or if some of them actually had empirically beneficial, if unrecognized, effects. Was it just a placebo, or did ancient wisdom contain forgotten truths? Regardless, you are experiencing the raw, unadulterated reality of medicine before science, a terrifying reliance on belief and hope in the face of immense physical trial. Every gulp of the bitter concoction is an act of desperate faith. With the herbal brews doing little to dull the sharp edges of your pain, your gaze shifts to the anxious faces around you. The terrifying intimacy of your situation underscores the role of family. Kunhi, a crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights how, in the absence of professional medical aid, the laboring woman was entirely dependent on the limited, often frightened, support of her immediate kin. This was not a moment for strangers. It was a desperate family affair. Imagine your mother, her own face etched with the lines of past labors, hovering nearby, perhaps a sister, younger than you, wide-eyed and pale, attempts to offer sips of water. A seasoned aunt might try to offer words of encouragement, her voice strained with worry. Their presence is a comfort, a physical anchor in a world that feels increasingly out of control. Yet you can see their helplessness, their fear mirroring your own as each contraction sweeps over you. Here's a quirky tidbit: while women were typically excluded from formal education, the knowledge of childbirth, however rudimentary, was a closely guarded secret passed down through generations of female relatives. It was a private, feminine ritual. Imagine your grandmother, years ago, showing your mother how to massage a back or prepare a warming compress, knowledge now desperately applied to you in this frigid room. You might even recall a vague memory of hushed conversations about women's troubles, never fully understood until now. Their support is largely emotional and physical. They might help you shift positions, wipe your brow with a damp cloth, or simply hold your hand, absorbing some of your pain through their touch. They might try to distract you with quiet stories or prayers, but their practical knowledge of managing a difficult birth is almost non-existent. They are witnesses, sympathizers, and co-sufferers, not trained medical personnel. Their fear is a palpable presence in the room, adding to the already suffocating atmosphere. The limited resources of the household also fall to them. Who fetches more firewood for the meager fire? Who ensures the bucket of water for washing, however cold and unsanitary, is replenished? These mundane, yet vital tasks fall to the anxious few who are present, their efficiency perhaps hampered by their own distress. This profound reliance on untrained family support meant that outcomes were largely left to chance. If labor was straightforward, their presence might be enough. But if complications arose, a breech birth, a prolonged labor, excessive bleeding, their love and desperate efforts would be tragically insufficient. The very bond that offers emotional solace also highlights the terrifying medical void. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on family and female community support in medieval childbirth fostered stronger communal bonds, or if it inadvertently perpetuated high mortality rates by excluding specialized medical knowledge that might have existed in other contexts. Was it a heartwarming tradition or a dangerous limitation? Regardless, you feel the raw, unfiltered emotional reality of relying entirely on the love and limited experience of your family. Their frightened faces are a reflection of the perilous journey you are all undertaking together in the cold, silent house. As the agonizing hours stretch, the scant comfort of family support struggles against a more insidious presence: darkness and fear. You are enveloped not just by the physical gloom of a windowless medieval house, but by the suffocating psychological weight of uncertainty and terror. This combination of dim lighting and pervasive anxiety is a crucial mainstream historical fact that profoundly impacted the birthing experience, making every sound and sensation a harbinger of potential catastrophe. Imagine the meager light in the room, perhaps a single flickering candle or a small oil lamp, casts dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. It's barely enough to see faces clearly, let alone assess a medical situation. The deepest corners of the room are swallowed by blackness, mirroring the vast unknown that lies before you. This dimness contributes to a sense of disorientation, making the already overwhelming pain feel even more isolating. You squint, trying to pierce the gloom, but it seems to press in from all sides. Here's a quirky tidbit to combat the oppressive darkness and the fear of malevolent spirits, a common belief in the medieval period. Some families would burn special herbs or incense, or even place religious icons or charms around the birthing area. Imagine the faint scent of smoldering herbs mingling with the smell of smoke and sweat, a desperate attempt to ward off unseen evils. You might even find yourself staring intently at the flickering flame, as if its tiny light holds some answer to your desperate prayers. The fear is a constant, gnawing presence. It's the fear of the unknown, of the agonizing pain, of complications you can't name but know are often fatal. It's the fear for your own life, and for the life of the fragile being struggling within you. Every prolonged silence, every sudden change in sensation, every worried glance from your attending family members amplifies this terror. You feel your heart hammering against your ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the long night. This psychological burden is immense. Without the reassurance of trained professionals, without the ability to know what is happening or what to expect, the mind fills the void with worst-case scenarios. Stories of difficult births, of women who didn't make it, or of babies born still and silent, haunt the edges of your consciousness. The darkness allows these terrifying images to flourish, unbidden. The physical strain of labor, combined with the lack of sleep and the constant cold, leaves you utterly exhausted, making it even harder to fight off the encroaching fear. You might drift in and out of consciousness, each return to awareness bringing a fresh wave of pain and dread. The hours merge into a timeless agony, illuminated only by the dim, flickering light and punctuated by the raw sounds of your struggle. Historians still argue whether the profound psychological stress and fear experienced by women during medieval childbirth contributed directly to physiological complications, such as prolonged labor or postpartum depression, or if these were largely separate from the physical challenges. Did fear physically hinder the process, or was it merely a byproduct of the inherent dangers? Regardless, you are experiencing the suffocating grip of darkness and fear, twin companions in this solitary battle, making every push a terrifying leap of faith into an uncertain future. The cold silence of the stone house seems to amplify your every anxious thought. As the struggle intensifies, you confront the most terrifying aspect of unassisted childbirth. Complications arise. This sudden, unwelcome turn of events, where typical birthing challenges become life-threatening without intervention, is a crucial mainstream historical fact that explains the brutal reality of high maternal and infant mortality rates in a world devoid of modern medical care. Imagine the agonizing rhythm of your labor, pushing with all your might, when suddenly something feels wrong. Perhaps the baby's descent seems to stall, or the contractions, once powerful, lose their force. You might feel an unexplainable pressure, or a sharp, tearing pain that isn't part of the normal progression. Panic, cold and sharp, pierces through your exhaustion. Your family members, if present, exchange terrified glances, their faces mirroring your own growing dread. They know instinctively that things are not going as they should, but they are utterly helpless. Here's a quirky tidbit. One of the most common and often fatal complications was a breech birth, where the baby presents feet first or bottom first instead of head first. Without skilled hands to turn the baby or perform a cesarean, which was almost always fatal for the mother in this era, such a presentation often meant the death of both mother and child. Imagine the horror of realizing the baby is emerging the wrong way and knowing there is absolutely nothing anyone can do to help. You might even feel a cold sweat break out on your brow, just thinking about such a dire situation. Other complications were equally deadly. A prolonged labor could lead to exhaustion, infection, or fetal distress, as the tiny life within you struggles against an insurmountable barrier. If the baby's head was too large for the birth canal, or if the mother's pelvis was too narrow, the situation was similarly hopeless. There was no concept of a C-section as a maternal rescue procedure. It was a post-mortem act, primarily to save the infant in the event of the mother's death. The sound of your strained breaths, ragged and desperate, fills the frigid air. There's no medical equipment, no sterile instruments to assist, no knowledge of internal examination to determine the problem. The women around you can only watch, offer encouragement, or resort to frantic, often useless, rituals or prayers. The desperation in their eyes is a profound mirror to your own. You are a ship caught in a storm, without a rudder, at the mercy of overwhelming forces. Historians still argue whether the primary cause of death during complicated medieval births was the physical trauma of the birth itself, or the inevitable infection that followed any prolonged or invasive attempt to assist. Was it the mechanical obstruction, or the unseen pathogens that sealed the fate of so many regardless. You are now locked in a terrifying struggle, facing a complication that, in your modern world, would likely be a manageable medical event. But here, in the cold stone house, feels like a death sentence. Every failing push, every new surge of pain, is a grim reminder of your ultimate vulnerability. If, by some miracle of endurance and natural alignment, the baby has finally emerged into the cold air, a new, equally critical, and often dangerous phase begins: the placenta and afterbirth. This vital and final stage, often overlooked in modern discussions, was a crucial mainstream historical fact that posed significant risks of hemorrhage and infection in the medieval context, sometimes claiming the mother's life even after a successful delivery. The struggle isn't over just because the baby is out. Imagine the sudden, profound relief as the baby cries its first shaky breath, a sound that cuts through the exhaustion and fear. But then, there's a new urgency. You feel your uterus contract again, less powerfully than before, but insistent. The placenta, the organ that has sustained your baby for months, must now be expelled. Your body, already utterly spent, is called upon for one more effort. Here's a quirky tidbit: traditional practices for delivering the placenta varied wildly. Some cultures would gently pull on the umbilical cord, while others might encourage the mother to cough or bear down. Still others believed in placing a heavy object on the abdomen to help expel it. Imagine a pan of hot embers, or a heavy stone, being placed on your tender belly, a strange mixture of relief and discomfort, all to encourage this final expulsion. You might even wince at the thought, despite the theoretical help. The danger here is twofold. Firstly, if the placenta doesn't separate cleanly from the uterine wall, it can lead to a lapretain placenta, which is incredibly dangerous. Bits of tissue left behind can cause severe hemorrhage, a rapid and often fatal loss of blood. Without blood transfusions, or any understanding of how to manually remove the placenta safely, this was a terrifyingly common cause of maternal death. You can almost feel the weakness creeping in if this were to happen, the world blurring at the edges. Secondly, even if the placenta is expelled, the open wound left inside your uterus is highly susceptible to infection. Remember the lack of hygiene. Any unwashed hands, any unsterile cloths, any contaminated air could introduce bacteria into your exhausted body. Puerperal fever, or childbed fever, caused by such infections, was a rampant killer of new mothers throughout history. You might shiver, even though the immediate pushing is over, at the thought of this invisible enemy. The women attending you would instinctively know the importance of expelling the afterbirth. They would watch anxiously, waiting for its appearance, understanding that this was a critical threshold. They might massage your belly or offer encouraging word, but again, their power to intervene against serious complications is virtually nil. Historians still argue whether the high incidence of puerperal fever in medieval childbirth was primarily due to a lack of understanding of germ theory and hygiene, or if it was exacerbated by pre-existing conditions like malnutrition and maternal exhaustion that weakened immune systems. Was it the unsanitary practices themselves, or the already compromised state of the mother, that led to so many deaths? Regardless, you are now in a precarious state, your body utterly vulnerable, as you await this crucial final stage, hoping against hope that nature completes its course without further fatal incident. The relief of the baby's arrival is quickly tempered by this new, silent threat. With the immense physical ordeal of childbirth behind you, and the afterbirth hopefully expelled, your focus immediately snaps to the tiny, fragile life now lying beside you. You are plunged into the desperate challenge of newborn care in cold, a crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights the overwhelming difficulty of keeping a vulnerable infant warm and safe in frigid, unheated conditions. A primary battle for survival in the very first moments of life. Imagine the newborn, tiny and vulnerable, perhaps mottled blue from the effort of birth, now exposed to the relentless chill of the stone house. Its skin, thin and delicate, offers little insulation. Its immature physiological systems are ill-equipped to regulate body temperature in such a hostile environment. You can almost feel the cold seeping into its little limbs, seeing its tiny shivers. The immediate instinct is to bundle, to protect, to create a haven of warmth against the encroaching cold. Here's a quirky tidbit to combat the cold. Medieval families would often swaddle newborns tightly in multiple layers of rough cloth, sometimes even placing them close to the hearth, or sharing the warmth of the mother's or other family members' bodies. Imagine the baby nestled against your own exhausted, still aching body, both of you fighting the chill, the warmth of your skin a precious, temporary shield against the pervasive cold. You might even find yourself instinctively pulling the blankets higher, wishing you had an endless supply of warm wool. The risk of hypothermia for a newborn in such conditions is immense. A baby quickly loses heat, and without immediate and sustained warmth, its core temperature can drop dangerously low, leading to lethargy, difficulty feeding, and ultimately, organ failure. This immediate struggle for thermal regulation was a silent, relentless killer of medieval infants, often before they had even properly drawn their first breaths outside the womb. Beyond simply keeping warm, the baby also needs to be kept clean, a monumental task in a world without running water or sterile environments. The umbilical cord stump, still attached, is a direct pathway for infection, constantly exposed to dust, dirt, and unwashed hands. You might see a family member attempting to wrap it with a clean cloth, but clean in this context is a relative term. The very act of breathing in the smoky, damp air of the stone house also poses a threat to fragile newborn lungs, still adjusting to life outside the womb. Every cough from the mother or other household members is a potential vector for disease, and the close proximity required for warmth ironically increases the risk of contagion. Historians still argue whether the high infant mortality rates in medieval Europe were primarily due to the immediate challenges of keeping newborns warm and preventing infection, or if underlying factors such as malnutrition, genetic vulnerabilities, and insufficient maternal care were equally significant contributors to their early deaths. Was it the chill or the germs that claimed more lives regardless? You are now acutely aware that the fight for survival has only just begun for this new life, a desperate moment-by-moment battle against the pervasive cold and the unseen enemies of medieval existence. Every tiny movement of the baby, every faint cry, is a testament to its fragile hold on life. With the fragile newborn bundled against the relentless cold, the next immediate and utterly vital challenge presents itself: nourishment. You are now confronting the Bar's First Feast colostrum's gift, a crucial mainstream historical fact highlighting the critical importance of early breastfeeding and the initial, nutrient-rich colostrum, coupled with the profound difficulties of establishing successful feeding in a stressed, unhygienic, and cold medieval environment. This was the baby's first, best chance at survival, but it was far from guaranteed. Imagine the tiny mouth searching, rooting instinctively against your breast. You, exhausted and aching, guide the baby, willing it to latch. The first few days of breast milk are not the copious, white liquid you might imagine. Instead, it's a colostrum, a yellowish, thick fluid, often called liquid gold. This substance is packed with antibodies, proteins, and growth factors, acting as the newborn's first immunization, protecting it from the countless pathogens lurking in the environment. It's truly a miracle of nature, delivered at precisely the moment it's most needed. Here's a quirky tidbit in some medieval beliefs. Colostrum was considered unclean or bad milk due to its color and consistency, and mothers were sometimes encouraged to express and discard it before offering the baby their true milk. Imagine a well-meaning but misguided relative trying to convince you to waste this precious, life-saving substance, further endangering your fragile newborn. You might instinctively push their hand away, trusting your own body's signals over their potentially harmful advice. Establishing a successful latch and milk supply in these conditions was incredibly difficult. Your body, depleted by pregnancy and labor, is now facing the demands of lactation, malnutrition, a common plight in medieval times, particularly during lean winter months, could severely impact your ability to produce sufficient milk. Dehydration, stress, and lack of sleep would further hinder milk production. The cold also plays a cruel role. If the baby is too cold, it becomes lethargic and too weak to suckle effectively. A baby that cannot feed quickly becomes dehydrated and susceptible to illness. The desperate cycle of cold, weakness, and insufficient feeding could quickly spiral into a fatal outcome. You might gently rub the baby's cold cheek, urging it to wake and feed, feeling the terrifying urgency of the moment. Without knowledge of proper latch techniques or methods to stimulate milk production, new mothers were often left to muddle through. If breastfeeding failed, alternatives were grim. Wet nursing, another woman breastfeeding the child, was an option for the wealthy, but impossible for most. Animal milk, if available, was unpasteurized and often caused severe digestive issues in infants. Hand feeding with rudimentary tools was fraught with the risk of infection and aspiration. Historians still argue whether the challenges of establishing breastfeeding in medieval times were primarily physiological, due to maternal health and environmental stressors, or if cultural practices, such as the initial discarding of colostrum or societal pressures, played a larger role in early infant mortality. Was it the body's struggle or the mind's misguided beliefs that posed the greater threat? Regardless, you are engaged in a fundamental, desperate act of survival, trying to provide this precious first feast to your tiny, vulnerable baby. Knowing its very existence hangs in the balance. The quiet sucking sound, if it comes, is the sweetest music you've ever heard. The relief of a successful feed, however brief, is swiftly replaced by a new, insidious fear. Your body, despite its heroic efforts, remains profoundly vulnerable. You are now facing the postpartum perils. 3. A crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights the immediate and life-threatening risks of postpartum hemorrhage and infection, which were rampant and often fatal killers of new mothers in the medieval period. The journey to motherhood often didn't end with birth. It merely transitioned to a new, equally treacherous landscape of danger. Imagine the exhaustion that washes over you, deeper than any sleep you've ever known. But even in this profound fatigue, a nagging sense of unease persists. Your body is still bleeding, as is normal. But how much is too much without any way to accurately measure blood loss or any medical intervention to stem a torrent? Even a steady trickle could rapidly lead to collapse. This postpartum hemorrhage was a silent, swift killer, draining the life from a woman in hours. You might feel a growing weakness, a dizziness that makes the room spin, a chilling awareness that something is terribly wrong. Here's a quirky tidbit to try and control bleeding. Medieval women might have been given astringent herbal concoctions, or their abdomen might have been massaged vigorously, or even have a cold compress applied. Imagine a well-meaning hand pressing down on your still tender belly, trying to coax your uterus to contract, while you grit your teeth against the pain, desperately hoping it will work. You might even hear the anxious whispers of your family, their fear palpable as they watch your strength ebb away. Even if immediate hemorrhage is avoided, the threat of infection looms large. Your uterus is an open wound, and the birthing canal has been stretched and potentially torn. Remember our talk about the dire lack of hygiene. Every unwashed hand, every unsterile cloth, every particle of dust in the smoky air is a potential vector for bacteria. Puerperal fever, or childbed fever, caused by such infections, often manifested days after birth, beginning with fever, chills, and abdominal pain, quickly spiraling into sepsis and death. The insidious nature of this threat, unseen and unheard, made it particularly terrifying. You might feel a flush of heat, despite the cold stone house, or develop a racking cough, symptoms that your family might attribute to a chill or bad humors, rather than a deadly bacterial invasion. There's no antibiotics, No understanding of germ theory, no way to combat the microscopic invaders silently multiplying within your exhausted body. Your body's own immune system, already weakened by the ordeal of childbirth and often chronic malnutrition, is left to fight a losing battle. The period immediately following birth, often referred to as confinement, was a time of extreme vulnerability. The new mother was traditionally kept warm, rested, and cared for. But even with the best intentions, the fundamental lack of sanitation and medical knowledge often meant a tragic outcome. Historians still argue whether the single greatest cause of maternal mortality in medieval Europe was direct hemorrhage during or after birth, or the delayed onset of infection from puerperal fever. Was it the sudden gush of blood, or the slow, creeping sickness that claimed more lives regardless? You are now acutely aware that the moment of birth was merely one hurdle in a race against time and unseen dangers. Every ache, every faint sign of fever, sends a fresh wave of terror through your exhausted body. Knowing the postpartum perils are still very real, lurking in the cold, unhygienic shadows of your stone house. With the immediate postpartum dangers hopefully averted, a new phase of recovery, both physical and social, begins. You now enter the period of white confinement, a crucial mainstream historical fact that refers to the traditional, often isolating, period of recovery for a new mother in medieval society, during which she was expected to rest and be cared for, often remaining indoors for several weeks or even longer. This wasn't just about physical healing. It was a deeply ingrained social and religious custom. Imagine the absolute exhaustion that settles over you after the ordeal. Your body aches in places you didn't even know existed. You might be weak from blood loss or simply from the sheer effort. During this confinement period, typically lasting from a few weeks to 40 days a number with biblical significance, you would be expected to remain in your bed or very close to it. Your family members, particularly the women, would take over household chores, bringing you food and caring for the newborn. It's a time of enforced stillness, a stark contrast to the physical demands of daily medieval life. Here's a quirky tidbit about confinement during this period. The new mother was sometimes considered ritually unclean in certain religious traditions, requiring a formal churching ceremony to reintegrate her into the community at the end of her confinement. Imagine feeling utterly spent, and on top of that, being told you're ritually impure and can't fully participate in village life until a specific ceremony. You might even find yourself grumbling under your breath about the sheer absurdity of it all. If you had the energy, while confinement offered a rare opportunity for rest, it was also often a period of isolation. Visitors might be limited, and your world would shrink to the confines of your cold, dimly lit room. For some women, especially those without supportive family, this isolation could be profoundly lonely and even dangerous if they weren't receiving adequate care. The lack of stimulating interaction, combined with physical recovery, could contribute to what we now recognize as postpartum depression. The goal of confinement was multifaceted to allow the mother's body to heal, particularly her uterus to contract back to its normal size and for any tears to mend, to protect both mother and newborn from exposure to illness, and to allow the new mother to bond with her infant without the immediate pressures of daily labor. The warmth of blankets, the closeness of the baby, and the hopefully regular nourishment brought to you were your only comforts. The quality of this confinement, of course, varied enormously based on social class. A noble woman might have a warm, private chamber, a wet nurse for her baby, and servants to cater to her every need. A peasant woman, like you, might be confined to a corner of her single-room dwelling, still battling the cold and relying on the stretched resources of her struggling family. The rest might be interrupted by the cries of other children or the constant demands of a life lived on the brink. Historians still argue whether the traditional period of confinement was genuinely beneficial for maternal recovery in the medieval context, or if it primarily served social and religious functions, sometimes even inadvertently increasing risks due to prolonged inactivity or poor hygiene within the confined space. Was it a practical health measure or a cultural imposition? Regardless, You are now experiencing the profound stillness of this confinement, a necessary but often difficult interlude, where your body slowly begins the arduous process of healing, and the world outside feels distant and strangely muted. The quiet hum of your own breath and the soft sounds of your newborn are your only companions. As you navigate the fragile period of confinement, another insidious threat, ever present in your medieval existence, comes into sharp focus: hygiene or lack thereof. This grim reality of pervasive unsanitary conditions for both mother and baby is a crucial mainstream historical fact that made postpartum infection and infant illness terrifyingly common, turning every touch and every cloth into a potential vector for deadly pathogens. Imagine the struggle. There's no clean running water. What water you do have might be drawn from a well or river, potentially contaminated with animal waste or human sewage. Washing your hands or even your body with anything approaching modern thoroughness is impossible. Soap, if available at all, is a harsh, rudimentary, lye-based substance, a luxury for personal hygiene rather than an everyday item. You might use a damp cloth to wipe yourself, but true cleanliness, by modern standards, is an unattainable dream. Here's a quirky tidbit without knowledge of germ theory. People didn't understand that unseen microbes cause disease. They might change a soiled bandage or wipe away blood, but the very cloths they use, even if washed, were often teeming with bacteria. Imagine the same basin of cold water being used for multiple purposes, from washing hands to cleaning soiled linens, effectively just moving germs around rather than eliminating them. You might even find yourself instinctively recoiling from certain objects, a primal revulsion to something that feels unclean, even if you don't know why. For the new mother, the open wound inside her uterus and any external tears are highly vulnerable. Every unsterile touch, every contaminated cloth used for dressing, every draft carrying dust and airborne pathogens can introduce infection. The pervasive presence of flies and other insects attracted to waste further compounds the risk. The body's immune system, already depleted from the ordeal of birth and often chronic malnutrition, is ill-equipped to fight off these relentless microbial invaders. For the newborn, the situation is even more precarious. Its undeveloped immune system is almost defenseless. The umbilical cord stump, a direct pathway into its tiny body, is a constant site of potential infection. Skin infections, eye infections, and respiratory illnesses are rampant, easily transmitted from caregivers or the environment. The very act of swaddling in unwashed cloths or placing the baby on dirty bedding could lead to life-threatening ailments. The air quality within your stone house is also a significant factor. The smoke from the hearth, combined with animal odors if you share space with livestock and general human effluvia, creates a pervasive, unhygienic atmosphere. This constant exposure to airborne irritants and pathogens further stresses the fragile respiratory systems of both mother and infant. Historians still argue whether the single greatest contributor to medieval maternal and infant mortality was the lack of direct medical intervention or the omnipresent threat of infection exacerbated by profound and unavoidable hygiene deficits. Was it the complications themselves or the subsequent infection that ultimately claimed more lives? Regardless, you are now keenly aware of the invisible war being waged against your body and your newborns, a silent, deadly battle against unseen enemies, where every breath and every touch carries an inherent risk in the chilling reality of your unhygienic stone home. You feel a profound sense of helplessness against a foe you cannot even perceive. Even as you cling to the fragile hope of recovery and the precious new life beside you, a grim statistical reality hangs heavy in the medieval air: infant mortality's shadow. This heartbreaking mainstream historical fact highlights the pervasive and tragically high rates of infant and child mortality that cast a constant pall over medieval families, making the survival of any child beyond its first few years a testament to sheer luck and resilience. Imagine looking at your tiny newborn, so perfect and vulnerable, and knowing deep in your heart the terrifying odds stacked against it. In medieval Europe, anywhere from 1 in 4 to as high as 1 in 2, children did not survive their first year of life. And for those who made it past infancy, the dangers of childhood diseases, accidents, and malnutrition continued to loom large, often claiming lives before they reached adulthood. This was not an anomaly. It was the norm, a brutal constant in every family's life. You might find yourself holding the baby just a little tighter, a silent plea against the harshness of the world. Here's a quirky tidbit due to the high mortality rates. Parents often delayed naming their children, or held only brief, simple naming ceremonies until the infant had survived the precarious first few days or weeks. This was a pragmatic, if heartbreaking, way to guard against the emotional devastation of naming a child only to lose it shortly thereafter. Imagine the profound sorrow woven into the very fabric of daily life, where joy was always tempered by the looming possibility of loss. You might even find yourself contemplating giving the baby a temporary placeholder name, just to spare yourself the agony if fate were to intervene. The causes of this widespread infant mortality were numerous, and intertwined exposure to cold and lack of warmth. As we've discussed, pervasive infections from unhygienic conditions, maternal malnutrition leading to insufficient breast milk or weakened babies, congenital defects, and the relentless onslaught of childhood diseases like measles, smallpox, and dysentery, for which there were no effective treatments. Each breath the baby took was a victory, each passing day a milestone against overwhelming odds. You've seen it happen in your own community. Neighbors who welcomed a new baby with joy, only to bury it weeks later. The quiet despair, the stoic acceptance, the constant fear for your own children. This pervasive shadow of infant mortality shaped family structures, emotional bonds, and even religious beliefs. Parents learned a painful resilience, finding ways to cope with a level of loss that would be unimaginable in today's world. The efforts you make to keep the baby warm, to feed it, to protect it from drafts and dirt, are desperate acts against an almost invisible enemy. Every coo, every suckle, every healthy gurgle is a profound reassurance, a small but significant defiance of the grim statistics. The future is uncertain, but for now, in this cold stone house, you fight for every precious moment. Historians still argue whether the high infant mortality rates primarily contributed to a more detached emotional bonding between parents and newborns in medieval times, or if such profound loss actually led to even stronger, albeit more stoic, forms of parental love and resilience. Did it harden hearts or deepen commitment? Regardless, you are now acutely aware of the heartbreaking reality of infant mortality's shadow, a pervasive, silent threat that made every new life a precious, fragile gamble, fought for with every fiber of your being. Even as the shadow of infant mortality looms large, a ray of light, however fleeting, often pierced the gloom in the medieval world. The naming rituals and beliefs. This swift, often immediate, act of bestowing a name upon a newborn was a crucial mainstream historical fact, intrinsically tied to religious beliefs, ancestral ties, and a desperate hope for the child's spiritual and earthly protection against the high mortality rates. Imagine the moments after birth, once the initial desperate care for mother and baby has been managed. Despite the exhaustion and fear, there's a quiet urgency. The family, particularly the mother, would often choose a name very quickly. It might be the name of a grandparent, honoring an elder and reinforcing familial bonds. It could be the name of a saint, invoking divine protection and patronage. Or it might simply be a name that carried a positive meaning, a hopeful wish for the child's future. You might hear the soft murmur of names being suggested, debated, and finally, chosen. A tiny spark of light in the cold, dim room. Here's a quirky tidbit in some traditions. The baby might be given a milk name or a temporary name immediately after birth, especially if survival was highly uncertain. The official, more formal name would only be given during a baptism or churching ceremony, often weeks later, after the infant had demonstrated a stronger hold on life. Imagine the baby being called Little One or Sweetling for days before finally being given a proper, hopeful name, a reflection of the cautious optimism of the time. You might even find yourself instinctively using such a tender, temporary endearment. The act of naming was profoundly significant. In many medieval belief systems, a name was more than just an identifier. It conferred identity, connected the individual to their family and community, and, crucially, linked them to the spiritual realm. By giving a child a saint's name, parents hoped for that saint's intercession and protection against illness and evil. This was a direct, proactive measure against the ever-present threat of infant death. The urgency of naming also stemmed from the pervasive fear of children dying unbaptized. An unbaptized child, according to Christian dogma, could not enter heaven. Thus, even if a formal baptism ceremony was delayed, the informal naming often served as a preliminary step, preparing the child for its spiritual journey. The whispers of prayer accompanying the naming would fill the air, a desperate plea for divine grace. You might feel a surge of tenderness as a name is finally chosen, a sense of this tiny, vulnerable being finally having an identity, a place in the world. It's a moment of profound humanity amidst the harshness, a testament to the enduring hope that flickers even in the face of overwhelming odds. The name once spoken feels like a fragile shield against the relentless threats of the medieval world. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of religious naming conventions in medieval Europe was primarily a reflection of genuine piety and a desire for divine protection, or if it was also a pragmatic response to the high infant mortality rates, offering psychological comfort and a structured way to cope with loss. Was it an act of faith or an act of desperation? Regardless, you are witnessing a moment where hope, belief, and the fragile joy of new life coalesce in the simple yet profound act of naming, a quiet ritual performed in the cold, uncertain dawn of a new existence. Following the brief, hopeful moment of naming, another ritual, even more urgent and steeped in profound anxiety, quickly follows. You are now confronting the Maori baptism's urgency, a crucial mainstream historical fact highlighting the desperate haste with which medieval newborns were baptized, driven by the pervasive fear of infant mortality and the theological belief that an unbaptized child could not enter heaven. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a desperate race against time and the specter of eternal damnation. Imagine your tiny, fragile newborn, perhaps just hours or a few days old, still weak and vulnerable. The cold air of the stone house offers no comfort. The immediate concern is its survival, but intertwined with that is the spiritual imperative. In a deeply religious medieval society, the unbaptized soul was believed to be condemned to limbo, or worse. This theological dread spurred a frantic drive to ensure baptism, even if it was just a hurried-on informal ceremony. You might feel the weight of this spiritual anxiety pressing down, even as your body aches from childbirth. Here's a quirky tidbit due to the urgency. Lay baptism was incredibly common, especially in rural areas or during difficult winters. Any person present at the birth, often the midwife if available, a family member, or even the father, could perform a rudimentary baptism by pouring water over the baby's head while reciting the Trinitarian formula, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." This informal baptism, performed in the house, was considered valid in an emergency, ensuring the child's soul was saved, even if its body perished. Imagine the trembling hand of a grandmother, pouring a few drops of precious, perhaps cold, water over the baby's fontanelle, her voice hushed with desperate prayer. You might even feel a shiver of reverence, or perhaps a pragmatic nod to their ingenuity. The formal, more elaborate church baptism, involving a priest and specific rites, would ideally follow, but it was often secondary to the immediate need for spiritual salvation. For many, especially in communities far from a church or during harsh weather, the lay baptism was the only one their child would receive. This highlights the practical adaptation of religious dogma to the harsh realities of medieval life and death. The overwhelming fear driving this urgency was the statistically high chance of the infant's death. Every cough, every fever, every difficulty in feeding brought a renewed sense of panic. Ensuring the child was baptized was one of the few actions parents could take to safeguard their child's eternal fate, even if they couldn't guarantee its earthly survival. This desperate hope underscores the profound intertwining of life, death, and spiritual belief in the medieval mind. You feel the profound relief, mingled with exhaustion, as the simple words are spoken and the water touches the baby's skin. It's a moment of spiritual solace amidst profound physical vulnerability, a quiet act of faith in a world where so much was beyond human control. Historians still argue whether the extreme emphasis on infant baptism in medieval society primarily reflected a genuine and widespread theological conviction about original sin and damnation, or if it also served a psychological function, providing a mechanism for parents to cope with inevitable loss and ensure spiritual peace for their deceased infants. Was it an act of pure faith or a coping mechanism for relentless grief regardless? You are witnessing the desperate urgency of baptism, a poignant testament to the fragility of life and the unyielding power of belief in a world where every tiny breath was precious and every soul was believed to be eternally at stake. Even as the sacred ritual of baptism offers a glimmer of spiritual solace, the harsh realities of your physical existence quickly reassert themselves. You now observe the often sparse or delayed community support in your remote or impoverished medieval setting, a crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights the varying degrees of aid available to a new mother, often limited by distance, resources, and the pervasive struggles of daily life. Imagine your tiny stone house, perhaps a little isolated from the main cluster of dwellings in the village. While a few close female relatives or neighbors might have been present for the birth and initial care, their ability to provide sustained, meaningful support is often limited. Everyone is busy with their own endless chores, tending fields, caring for livestock, gathering fuel, feeding their own families. There's no social safety net, no organized postnatal care, just the strained resources of a struggling community. Here's a quirky tidbit in some wealthier or more densely populated areas. There might have been a tradition of neighbors bringing small gifts of food or offering practical help for a few days after a birth. Imagine a neighbor arriving with a small, precious loaf of fresh bread or a handful of dried herbs, a simple but profoundly appreciated gesture in your impoverished state. You might even feel a pang of gratitude, knowing how much effort such a gift represents in their own meager lives. However, for many, especially in remote peasant communities or during harsh seasons like winter, such assistance might be minimal or delayed. Roads could be impassable, distances daunting, and resources too scarce for anyone to spare much. The well-meaning neighbor might only visit once or twice, offering a few words of encouragement before returning to their own demanding life. The burden of recovery and newborn care often fell almost entirely on the mother and her immediate nuclear family. The women who do provide support are likely untrained, their knowledge based on anecdote and tradition rather than any formal understanding of hygiene or postpartum care. Their presence is emotional comfort and practical help with basic chores, but they are not medical professionals. You feel the weight of their own struggles, knowing they can only offer so much from their own strained reserves. This limited community support means that if complications arise days or weeks after birth, you are still largely on your own. A spreading infection, a persistent fever, or a baby failing to thrive would likely go unaddressed by any formal medical help. The community might offer prayers and sympathy, but little in the way of effective intervention. Historians still argue whether the concept of community support in medieval childbirth was truly robust and widespread, or if it was more idealized in later historical accounts, with the reality being much harsher for the majority of the population. Was it a strong communal bond or a fragile network? Regardless, you are now keenly aware of the solitary nature of your postpartum recovery, relying on the strained kindness of a few, while the vast majority of the world outside your cold stone house continues its own relentless struggle for survival, leaving you largely to your own devices. The sounds of daily life outside, muffled by the thick stone walls, remind you of your temporary, yet vulnerable, isolation. As you continue your fragile recovery, a new insidious worry begins to gnaw at you: the question of sustenance. You are now acutely aware of food and nutrition post-birth, a crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights the often inadequate and monotonous diet available to mother and child in challenging medieval circumstances, profoundly impacting recovery, milk production, and the baby's long-term health. This wasn't just about feeling hungry, it was about the very building blocks of life and healing. Imagine the meager stores in your cold stone house. It's likely winter or early spring, meaning fresh produce is scarce or non-existent. Your diet probably consists of hearty staples, coarse grains like barley or rye, perhaps some dried legumes, a bit of salted meat or fish if you're lucky, and root vegetables that have lasted in storage. The concept of a balanced diet is centuries away, and certainly not a luxury for someone of your social standing. You might pick at a piece of stale bread, wishing for something more nourishing, something to truly replenish your depleted body. Here's a quirky tidbit to try and boost a new mother's strength and milk supply. Some medieval traditions would recommend specific, often rich, foods like chicken broth, ale, or even spiced wine. Imagine your family trying to procure a precious chicken or a special brew for you, a significant sacrifice in their own limited diet, hoping it would work miracles. You might even find yourself savoring a rare mouthful of something warm and slightly flavorful, a small moment of comfort in the pervasive cold. However, these special foods were often temporary and insufficient. Chronic malnutrition was widespread in medieval peasant communities. Your own body, already depleted by 9 months of pregnancy and the immense physical toll of childbirth, now needs extra calories, protein, and vitamins for recovery and to produce breast milk. Without adequate nutrition, your healing would be slow, leaving you vulnerable to infection, and your milk supply might be insufficient or lacking in vital nutrients for the baby. For the newborn, the mother's milk is its only source of nourishment. If your milk is poor quality or insufficient due to your own diet, the baby's growth will be stunted, its immune system weakened, and its chances of survival significantly reduced. Every tiny suckle, every contented sigh from the baby is a testament to the success of your struggle to nourish it, a constant worry weighing on your mind. The effort required to procure and prepare food in medieval times was immense, further burdening your already stretched family. Fuel for cooking was scarce, water had to be fetched, and even the simplest meal required laborious preparation. This constant struggle for basic sustenance made the concept of specialized postnatal nutrition an impossibility. Historians still argue whether chronic maternal malnutrition was a more significant factor in infant mortality than acute birth complications, or if both played equally devastating roles in the precarious survival rates of medieval newborns. Was it the quality of the mother's diet or the dangers of the birth process? That was the ultimate arbiter of fate. Regardless, you are now acutely aware of the profound connection between the meager food on your table and the fragile health of both yourself and your newborn. Understanding that every bite you take and every drop of milk you produce is a desperate act of defiance against the harsh, nutrient-poor realities of your medieval world. The gnawing emptiness in your stomach is a constant, stark reminder. As you continue to navigate the difficult postpartum period, the immediate challenges of cold, hygiene, and nutrition begin to coalesce into a longer-term concern: the mother's long-term health. This crucial mainstream historical fact highlights how the repeated, unassisted, and often complicated pregnancies and births profoundly impacted women's bodies in medieval times, leading to chronic health issues and a significantly shortened lifespan compared to men. The ordeal of childbirth didn't just end with the delivery. Its echoes resonated through a woman's entire life. Imagine your body are still aching, still recovering. You might have lingering pains, chronic fatigue, or persistent infections that never fully resolve. Every subsequent pregnancy, Every subsequent birth would add another layer of strain, another irreversible toll on your already depleted reserves. The concept of pelvic floor therapy or addressing prolapse is millennia away. These issues would simply become a painful, debilitating part of life. You might find yourself moving with a stiffness you never had before, a constant reminder of the burdens your body has carried. Here's a quirky tidbit without knowledge of proper wound care or surgical intervention. Even minor tears from childbirth could lead to chronic pain, incontinence, or fistulas, making daily life incredibly difficult and isolating. Imagine living with constant discomfort and the pervasive smell of incontinence, a silent, humiliating burden. You might even find yourself gritting your teeth against a sudden, sharp pain, a ghost from a past labor. Repeated pregnancies, often starting at a young age and continuing until menopause or death, meant that a woman's body was in an almost constant state of either pregnancy, childbirth, or lactation. This relentless biological cycle, combined with a physically demanding lifestyle, poor nutrition, and a lack of medical care, led to accelerated aging and a host of chronic ailments. Anemia was common due to frequent blood loss. Bone density suffered from continuous nutrient depletion, and organ prolapse was a grim reality for many. The average lifespan for a woman in medieval Europe, particularly a peasant woman, was significantly shorter than for men, often due to these childbirth-related complications. A woman might be considered old in her late 30s or early 40s, her body worn out by the demands of constant childbearing. Her face would be etched with lines, her posture perhaps stooped, her strength slowly but surely eroded. There was no retirement from childbearing for women who could still conceive. The economic necessity for more hands in the field, coupled with the high infant mortality rates, meant that families constantly strived to have more children, placing an unrelenting burden on the mother's body. Historians still argue whether the primary factor contributing to women's shorter lifespans in medieval times was the direct physical toll of childbirth, or if the broader societal inequalities, such as less access to food, heavier workloads, and vulnerability to violence, were equally or more significant. Was it the womb or the world that ultimately claimed more female lives regardless? You are now acutely aware that the very act of bringing life into this cold, harsh world carries a profound and enduring cost to your own body, a sacrifice woven into the very fabric of medieval womanhood. You feel the deep fatigue, a weariness that goes beyond simple exhaustion, a sense of your own finite strength. While your body bears the indelible marks of childbirth, you also observe the anxious figure hovering on the periphery of this intensely female experience, the father's helplessness. Neri, this often limited and disempowered role of the father in the birthing process is a crucial mainstream historical fact, highlighting his emotional distress and practical limitations in a situation where direct intervention was largely forbidden to him and medical knowledge was scant. Imagine the father of your child, perhaps pacing nervously just outside the door of your small room, or sitting silently by the hearth, his face grim with worry. He's not permitted to be in the immediate birthing space in most medieval cultures, as childbirth was considered a women's domain, a private, even sacred ritual from which men were often excluded. His role is to provide, to protect, and to wait, and in that waiting, he is profoundly helpless. Here's a quirky tidbit in some regions. The father might be asked to perform specific sympathetic magic rituals outside the birthing room, perhaps untying knots or loosening belts, mirroring the hope for an easy untying of the birth canal. Imagine him fumbling with a complicated knot on a rope, convinced that his actions, however symbolic, might somehow ease your suffering. You might even hear the faint rustle of his movements, a distant, almost comedic attempt to control the uncontrollable. His practical contributions during the actual birth are minimal. He might fetch water, bring fuel for the fire, or tend to other children. But he is fundamentally excluded from the intimate, dangerous struggle unfolding within. He relies entirely on the reports from the women inside, anxiously awaiting news, desperate for a cry that signals life, terrified of the silence that means loss. The emotional burden on the father was immense. He was forced to passively witness his wife's suffering, knowing she faced a very real risk of death and that his child might not survive. He could offer no medical aid, no pain relief, only his presence, his prayers, and his quiet despair. This helplessness could be profoundly agonizing, leaving him feeling useless in the face of such overwhelming vulnerability. His power, instead, would manifest after the birth, in protecting the new family, providing for them, and eventually, if the child survived, in raising and educating them. But in the raw, immediate crucible of childbirth, his role was largely one of anxious anticipation and indirect support. Historians still argue whether the exclusion of fathers from the birthing room in medieval times primarily stemmed from deeply ingrained cultural taboos and the ritualistic nature of childbirth, or if it was also a practical division of labor, with men focusing on external survival tasks, while women managed internal domestic and biological events. Was it a matter of ritual purity or societal roles regardless? You feel the quiet, anxious presence of the father, his helplessness a stark contrast to your own overwhelming struggle, a silent witness to the profound vulnerability of both mother and child in this freezing stone house. His worry, like yours, is a palpable presence in the air. Beyond the immediate concerns of your own survival and that of your newborn, the raw reality of childbirth in this medieval setting leaves an indelible mark on those who witness it. You now consider the profound impact on any children as witnesses, a crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights how older siblings often experience the unfiltered, terrifying reality of a mother's labor and the precariousness of new life, shaping their understanding of family, life, and death from a very young age. Imagine your older children, perhaps a son or daughter of 5 or 6, huddled in a corner of the single-room dwelling, or banished to a cold, adjacent lean-to. They hear your cries of pain, muffled perhaps, but unmistakable. They see the frantic movements of the adults, the worried expressions, the grim determination. They might catch glimpses of blood, or hear the baby's first, weak cries followed by anxious silence. This is not a sanitized hospital-set birth. It's a visceral, primal event unfolding before their innocent eyes. You might hear their soft whimpers, or the occasional question whispered to an older relative, their small voices filled with confusion and fear. Here's a quirky tidbit: while some cultures might try to shield children from such intense moments, in many medieval peasant households, the lack of space and the communal nature of life meant that children were often present during births and deaths. It was simply part of life's tapestry, observed directly. Imagine a child attempting to comfort a frightened sibling, repeating the reassurances they've heard from adults, even as their own small hearts pound with fear. You might even find yourself wishing you could shield them from this raw, brutal reality, but there's simply nowhere for them to go. The experience could be deeply traumatizing. Witnessing a mother's immense pain, the real possibility of her death, and the often precarious survival of a new sibling would imprint upon a child a profound understanding of life's fragility. They would quickly learn about the high stakes of reproduction, the constant shadow of loss that hung over every family. This raw exposure to the cycle of life and death, often violent and swift, shaped their emotional landscape and their view of the world. The immediate aftermath, too, would be part of their experience. They would see the exhausted mother, the tiny, vulnerable newborn, and perhaps, if the outcome was tragic, the quiet grief of adults. These events weren't just abstract stories. They were concrete, personal experiences that shaped their childhoods and prepared them for the grim realities of their own adult lives. Historians still argue whether this early exposure to the realities of birth and death made medieval children more emotionally resilient and stoic, or if it contributed to unseen psychological trauma and a desensitization to suffering. Did it prepare them for a harsh world, or simply break their innocence prematurely? Regardless, you are acutely aware of the small eyes watching, the little ears listening, as your monumental struggle unfolds. The silent questions in their gaze, the tremor in their small hands, are a poignant reminder of the enduring impact of this terrifying experience on the very youngest members of your family, shaping their understanding of life's relentless rhythm in the cold, unyielding stone house. Their innocence, like yours, is being irrevocably altered. As the raw experience of birth and its immediate aftermath leaves its mark on everyone present, you consider an external force, relentless and indifferent, that profoundly influences survival, the seasonal impact on survival. This dramatic interplay between the time of year a birth occurs and the odds of survival for both mother and child is a crucial mainstream historical fact, highlighting how the rhythms of nature dictated life and death in the medieval world. Imagine your birth occurring, as it has during the depths of winter, the cold, the lack of fresh food, the impassable roads, and the heightened risk of illness all conspire against you. The likelihood of you or your newborn succumbing to a chill, an infection, or malnutrition is significantly higher. Winter was a period of scarcity and vulnerability, and a birth during this time added immense pressure to already strained household resources. You might feel a chill run down your spine, even now as you consider the precariousness of this particular season. Here's a quirky tidbit, conversely. A birth during the summer or harvest season, while still dangerous, offered relatively better odds. Fresh food was abundant, the weather was warmer, and travel was easier, potentially allowing for more timely assistance or better postnatal nutrition. Imagine the subtle sigh of relief among a medieval family when a birth occurred in late spring, knowing the chances were incrementally better than in the biting cold of February. You might even find yourself instinctively longing for the warmth of the sun, for the promise of easier days. The availability of food was a major factor. Winter often meant reliance on stored, often less nutritious, provisions. Spring, before the new harvest, could be the hungry gap, a period of severe food shortage. This direct link between agricultural cycles and maternal-infant health meant that the timing of conception, and thus birth, could have unforeseen life or death consequences. A birth during a famine year, regardless of the season, would have been particularly catastrophic. Disease also followed seasonal patterns. Respiratory illnesses, like coughs and fevers, were more prevalent in winter due to cold, damp conditions and close indoor living. Gastrointestinal diseases, like dysentery, might peak in warmer months due to contaminated water sources. Each season presented its own unique set of threats, and medieval communities were largely defenseless against them. The practicalities of travel for aid or supplies were also deeply seasonal. Heavy snows could isolate villages for weeks, making a journey to a market or to summon a more experienced healer impossible. Muddy roads in spring or heavy rains in autumn could similarly hinder movement. This geographical isolation, exacerbated by the season, further limited options for assistance during or after birth. Historians still argue whether the impact of seasonality on medieval mortality was primarily a direct result of environmental factors like temperature and food availability, or if it was more a reflection of indirectly related factors, such as the seasonal patterns of disease transmission or the availability of labor for harvesting and household chores. Was it the weather or the way human life adapted to it? That was the ultimate arbiter. Regardless, you are now acutely aware that the season of your birth, or the birth of your child, was not a matter of choice, but of destiny, profoundly influencing the very precarious chances of survival in your cold, unforgiving medieval world. The memory of the biting winter wind seems to follow you, even in thought. Having endured the relentless challenges of medieval birth in its harsh seasonal context, you now arrive at a profound, if quiet, understanding. Survival's small victories. This acknowledgement of the sheer luck and immense resilience required for even a basic positive outcome is a crucial mainstream historical fact, underscoring that in an era of overwhelming odds, simply living through childbirth, for both mother and child, was nothing short of a triumph. Imagine the days and weeks after the birth. You are exhausted, your body aching, still battling the cold and the threat of infection. Your baby is tiny, fragile, demanding constant attention. Yet, against all the forces arrayed against you, the freezing house, the lack of modern medicine, the scarcity of food, the omnipresent germs, the statistical shadow of death, you are both alive. This isn't a grand, celebrated victory with trumpets and parades. It's a quiet, personal miracle, a profound sigh of relief. You might even find yourself just watching the baby breathe, the simple rise and fall of its chest, a testament to impossible endurance. Here's a quirky tidbit to mark these small victories of survival. Families might hold a modest Thanksgiving ritual, perhaps offering a special prayer or a small offering at the local church, or sharing a slightly better meal if they could afford it. It wasn't about extravagant celebration, but about acknowledging divine grace and expressing profound gratitude for a life preserved against such odds. Imagine the quiet, heartfelt prayer whispered over a sleeping infant, a fragile beacon of hope in the vast darkness of uncertainty. You might even feel a tear prick your eye, a release of the immense tension that has held you captive. Every successful feed, every healthy cry, every day the baby draws breath is a small victory. Every step you take towards recovery, every moment you feel a flicker of returning strength is a profound testament to your body's resilience. These are the unsung triumphs of medieval life, moments of profound relief that were hard-won against immense adversity. The resilience wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional. To navigate constant fear, pain, and uncertainty, and to emerge with a new life, required an extraordinary strength of spirit. Women of this era lived with a level of stoicism and endurance that is almost unimaginable today. Their lives a continuous battle for survival. This understanding of small victories also shifts our perspective on history. When we look at mortality statistics, it's easy to overlook the immense human effort, the desperate hope, and the sheer luck that went into every single survival. Each birth, each growing child, was a defiance of the odds, a testament to the tenacity of life itself. Historians still argue whether the concept of survival in medieval times implied a simple biological existence, or if it also encompassed a deeper, perhaps spiritual, understanding of life's purpose in the face of such pervasive precarity. Was it merely a biological fact or a profound testament to human will? Regardless, Imam, you are now keenly aware of the silent, heroic triumph of simply being alive, of having navigated the perilous journey of birth in a freezing stone house. The gentle rhythm of your newborn's breathing is the sweetest music, a testament to a victory that, though small, feels absolutely boundless. Having witnessed the monumental individual triumph of survival, your perspective now widens to recognize a profound, often unseen connection between these grim historical realities and the world you inhabit today. You are now tracing the echoes in modern medicine, a crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights how the desperate circumstances of medieval childbirth, with its high mortality and rampant complications, directly spurred the development of modern obstetrics, hygiene, and pain management. Our present-day comforts were born from their profound suffering. Imagine the sheer scale of medieval suffering, countless mothers lost to hemorrhage and infection, innumerable infants succumbing to cold, hunger, or unseen microbes. This relentless human cost, repeated generation after generation, slowly but surely began to spur observation, inquiry, and eventually, scientific progress. The very problems that threatened your life in the stone house, the lack of sanitation, the ignorance of internal mechanics, the absence of pain relief, became the critical puzzles that future generations of medical pioneers sought to solve. You might find yourself marveling at this distant, painful genesis of your own comfort. Here's a quirky tidbit, the breakthrough understanding of puerperal fever. Childbed fever in the 19th century, by figures like Ignaz Semmelweis, came directly from observing the horrific death rates of mothers in hospitals where doctors, fresh from autopsies, delivered babies without washing their hands. His insistence on hand washing, initially ridiculed, drastically reduced mortality. Imagine the centuries of women dying from what we now know was preventable infection, simply because no one understood invisible germs. You might even find yourself instinctively wanting to wash your hands, a modern habit born from such ancient tragedy. The development of obstetric forceps, the advent of safe anesthesia, the understanding of blood types for transfusions, and the eventual mastery of surgical techniques like cesarean sections. All of these monumental advances were driven by the historical need to overcome the very challenges you faced. Each tool, each procedure, each medical discovery is a direct answer to a problem that once seemed insurmountable in that cold, isolated dwelling. Modern medicine's emphasis on prenatal care, sterile environments, fetal monitoring, and pain management aren't just conveniences. They are hard-won victories against the pervasive dangers that were once the norm. Every comfortable hospital bed, every reassuring monitor, every gloved hand of a medical professional is an echo of the countless, desperate medieval births that went so terribly wrong. Historians still argue whether the acceleration of medical advancements in obstetrics was primarily driven by humanitarian concern for suffering women, or if it was also influenced by changing societal values that placed a higher premium on individual lives in the scientific method. Was it compassion or curiosity that spurred the greatest change? Regardless, you now see the profound historical arc, understanding that your very modern medical safety nets are a direct legacy of the desperate, high-stakes gambles of medieval childbirth. The silent screams from the stone house paved the way for modern calm and competence. You feel a deep gratitude for the long, painful journey of human progress, built on the very struggles you've imagined. As the profound connection between past suffering and modern medical triumph settles in your mind, your final step on this immersive journey takes you beyond the specifics of birth and into a broader reflection. You will now step back and consider, yawning, beyond the stone walls. A crucial mainstream historical fact that highlights the enduring strength of human endurance in the face of insurmountable odds, not just in childbirth, but in the myriad challenges of medieval life. Imagine those countless individuals, like you, who faced not just a freezing stone house and a dangerous birth, but also famine, plague, war, and the relentless grind of daily survival. Their lives were lived on a knife edge, with very little in the way of safety nets or comfort. Yet, humanity persisted. Life, however precarious, found a way. This ability to endure, to adapt, to keep living and hoping despite profound adversity, is perhaps the most powerful lesson from this journey. Here's a quirky tidbit despite the brutal realities. Medieval people found profound joy in small moments: the warmth of a fire, the laughter of children, the taste of a good meal after a long day, the simple relief of a healthy birth. Their resilience wasn't just about stoicism, it was about finding happiness and meaning amidst hardship. Imagine a new mother, perhaps weeks after the terrifying birth, finally managing a genuine smile as her baby gurgles contentedly. A moment of pure, unadulterated joy that transcends all the preceding suffering. You might even feel a surge of warmth in your own chest, a connection to that primal human joy. Their strength wasn't just individual, it was communal. Despite the limitations of formal support, neighbors helped neighbors, families leaned on each other, and small acts of kindness provided crucial relief. The shared experience of hardship often forged deep, unbreakable bonds within communities, a silent understanding of mutual struggle and survival. The human spirit, in all its resilience, found ways to cope with death, to celebrate life, and to continually strive forward. They built cathedrals, crafted beautiful manuscripts, told epic stories, and created intricate social structures, all while battling the fundamental forces of nature and disease. Their lives were short, often brutal, but never without meaning or the fierce determination to survive and reproduce. This journey through medieval childbirth forces us to confront our own fragility and to appreciate the vast chasm between our present-day lives and theirs. It makes the ordinary extraordinary, The taken for granted miraculous. It teaches a deep empathy for those who came before, reminding us that the human experience, while vastly different in its outward comforts, is fundamentally linked by the shared journey of life, struggle, and hope. Historians still argue whether the perceived simplicity of medieval life fostered a deeper spiritual connection and communal bond, or if it merely masked unimaginable suffering and a brutal indifference to individual pain. Was their resilience a virtue or a necessity regardless? You are left with a profound sense of respect for their enduring spirit, a quiet admiration for a people who, from freezing stone houses and against overwhelming odds, continued to live, to love, and to bring new life into an often unforgiving world. The faint scent of wood smoke, the ghost of a baby's cry, and the enduring chill of stone now gently fade, leaving you with a deep appreciation for the quiet, monumental strength of those who live beyond the stone walls. Now, as the echoes of our journey gently fade, imagine the soft glow of moonlight illuminating these ancient stones, softened by the passage of countless centuries. The bustling sounds of ancient life have long since fallen silent, replaced by the hushed whispers of the night. The freezing house, the anxious family, the fragile newborn, they all now stand as quiet sentinels, bathed in silver, their stories told, their lessons learned. Feel the cool air, perhaps a gentle breeze drifting past, carrying the scent of ancient earth and enduring strength. Your mind, full of resilience and survival, is ready to rest. The weighty thoughts of human endurance can now gently dissolve into the comfortable quiet. Let the images of perseverance, bathed in starlight, guide you deeper into slumber. You are safe, enveloped by the stillness of history. Good night. Sweet dreams.